Yeah, great. Well, I think we're 2 minutes into 11 o'clock. I think we have around 8, 9 attendees already. So I think it's a good time for us to get started. All right, let's do it. Well, welcome everyone to our webcast today titled DNA Privacy and the Web 3.0 Revolution. I'm joined today by Daniel Uribe, the founder and CEO of Genobank, Gisele, who is the founder of Engineering Hearts and has a Ph.D. in educational psychology. She uses her background in teaching, human teaching, and learning across sectors and industries to critically analyze socio-technical problems. And her latest work is in blockchain and AI ethics. And my name is Sukhmen, Nijjar, and I'm the marketing advisor here. Before we get started into the actual guts of everything, one question we like to pose to everyone is, how important is privacy to you? This is a topic that, as of late, has been very, very at the top of mind of a lot of people, especially in the digital age that we live in. In terms of current events, not only in regards to health and biodata, but privacy has been a very, very big and overarching issue, right? In the early 2000s, we remember the Patriot Act, where the government, the US government was allowed to tap into phones and emails. Facebook and Google has been known and covered widely to be accessing data and actually brokering it to third parties. And more recently, with the coronavirus pandemic, we've seen Apple and Google, who have monopolies over phones, smartphone industry, automatically placing policies that allow them to contact trace and see exactly the geolocation of everyone who uses these devices. And these are prevalent issues that are wide-ranging, not only in the aspect of just biodata and what we're talking about here today, but just across the realm of data in general. But what we're here to talk about today is the importance of privacy of your DNA. This is a question that we want to pose to all our attendees today, and we would like to help answer. And with that, I'll pass it to Daniel. You can talk about the start of things with the genomic revolution.
Thank you very much, Suk. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. My name is Daniel Uribe. I'm very honored that everyone is here today. So, as Suk was mentioning, just some facts. It was not until 2006 where SSL, the certificates that started encrypting the messages in internet began. So it is really not very far along in the time where the internet started to feel an unsafe place to interchange or exchange information. So now 14 years after, we are looking into also a parallel phenomena, which is the so-called genomic revolution. The genomic revolution started when, as humans, we were able to read or assemble for the first time the first human genome, right? So it was an effort like 30 years ago or something like that, that cost there was an investment of $1.3 billion, and now we are in the cost of $500 to read a whole genome of a human being. And of course, this journey, and today we are here because we are standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of the scientists that have done all this job, and all these DNA readers that are known as sequencers, right? So the genomic revolution is the intersection between the computer science, biology, and the ability to read DNA, right? DNA is literally a molecule that is in our bodies and contains the map, right, of how we have been built, and it's also the instructions to generate new cells, and therefore new proteins, and therefore new tissue, right? So it's super important. And all these scientific discoveries with the genomic revolution has led to also new responsibilities, right? So the more we know, or the more information we have, the more responsibles we are. And right now we are here because there is a big question regarding who is a good custodian, what is a good custodian, how you can differentiate between companies that have a good mechanism in place to store and guarantee the privacy of these are the most sensitive data that we have. So again, this is a biology kind of theme. It has an intersection with medicine. Just only when someone expresses a disease that is related to a DNA mutation. Before that, if you are healthy, then is your biology. So no necessarily DNA or RNA is related to health issues or health related things. So many doctors think that genetics is part of medicine, but it is not. It's really part of biology. And I mentioned this because I've been chatting with some of them, and they say that this information belongs to the health system and they should know, and so on and so forth. But I would say no, this is the biology of each individual, and they have the right to explore these tools, which we call the genomic revolution, without going necessarily through a health system or a health provider. And some of them react well, some of them react not very well. But the thing is that this is an information that you can have without going through any health provider.
Mm-hmm. And this really does set up the framework for our whole conversation today, right? Without the genomic revolution, we really wouldn't be here today. And what we saw shortly after the genomic revolution was the move from sequencing providers like the names you see here, 23andMe, Ancestry.DNA, and the others. I'm sure we're all very familiar with these names. They were really the pioneers in allowing consumers around the world to be able to have their DNA analyzed and be and receive, traits and from ancestry to anything else, right? But with that, we saw a number of drawbacks, and very, very quickly, we saw it covered across the web from publishers around the world, the downsides of using services like these. And a lot of it ends up being around privacy. Whether it was our privacy of our DNA actually being taken and made use of by pharmaceutical companies, whether it was the government, insisting that their employees do not use these sequencing providers because of a number of drawbacks that are still unaware to us. This is very, very evident very, very quickly to us. And especially as of late, we have seen a significant drawback of 23andMe and their kits being bought because people are realizing the drawbacks, not only from privacy standpoint, but just from a demand standpoint. People are beginning to learn about all of this. And this actually leads us into our next conversation around the Web 3.0 revolution, right? And it's important for us to talk about the history of it before we get into Web 3.0. Daniel, would you like to start with the Web 1.0 up?
Yes, thank you very much. Can you just, I would like to comment something.
Absolutely.
So here, like if we can invite the audience just to read how this is this topic kind of view, because we were talking about these two, especially the one that is from the New York Times, both that says U.S. government plans to collect DNA from detained immigrants, right? So in one side, they know the power of this very sensitive information, and they obtain it. I don't know if it's a controversy if it's lawful or unlawful how they do it, but they do it. And in the other hand, they invite Pentagon, right, warns military personnel against these DNA tests, right? So it's, of course, this kind of two double-sided kind of message that it allows you to think how important this data, because it's I talked to, like, for instance, I had the chance last year to talk to the Israeli director of cybersecurity for the whole country. And for them, for the Israelis executives, DNA from their citizens is a national security issue. I mean, it's something that could lead to bioweapons or something like that. So it's very, very sensitive, this kind of data. So yeah. Okay, I just wanted to comment that. Thank you very much. So let's have a little history here. Just very quick, because it's interesting for me, because I'm 44 years old. I've seen them all of this happening since I was in college to when I was a professional, and now I'm like, let's say a more seasoned professional. But Web 1.0, if we remember, the only intention was to connect and to grow into nodes, right? So it all happened. We already know it was a military project. Then it happened to the universities. The universities were the second entities to have the privilege to have internet. Then it started growing, and in the era 1.0, the only purpose was to connect, right? So to have as a web server, we were dealing with translating IP addresses into names, into human readable names, and so on and so forth. So it was very, very basic what we could do with 1.0. Then we jumped like a decade after 2000s, where the first commercial efforts, we saw the .com in this Web 2.0 kind of moment in time. Still, it's centralized, and the reason it's centralized is the cost. So of course, in Web 1.0 and Web 2.0, the cost for someone to have even a web server, or I remember, like, for instance, in 2002, you had to buy your own server. In that time, I was working for Sun Microsystems, and a web server cost like $25,000 in that time. So to have a web server of your company just connected to the internet was super expensive and not affordable for 99% of the companies. So this is Web 2.0, is still centralized. We are still somehow in this era where we call it the corporate internet. So in Web 2.0, the big winners are or were and still are Facebook, Amazon, Google, Apple, and in the Asian continent, of course, is WeChat and Tencent and all these big companies as well. And in terms of the privacy of people, so the encryption and the protection plays a very important role, but all of the security is planned and deployed to protect the enterprise from their users. That's literally what is going on. So the companies, like for instance, the bank, if they placed all the security in their credit cards and the apps and everything is for their users to they are protecting from the users to prevent them to spend more money than they have in their accounts, or prevent hacks. But they are not thinking about empowering the users. They are just protecting themselves, protecting their assets or digital assets, and protecting their database. So in this Web 2.0, and I say it again, still are companies think all the data they have belongs to them. Is the value, the valuation of some of these companies are strictly attached to the content or the databases that they have. Now, very quickly, we're transitioning. Hopefully, this is a big movement, especially with young people. Young people is pushing this very hard, because Web 2.0 has been full of scandals and bad stories about hackings and big companies being breached, with millions of records lost in the dark market, and so on and so forth. So Web 3.0 is about literally to empower the user, right? And in this new internet, it's called the edge internet, because you empower the edges, you empower users with their phones, right? This is curious, because today in your hand, if you have a smartphone, whether if it's an Android or an Apple, it is funny to say that those devices are super powerful. I mean, you have literally $1 million on each, if you put it 10 years ago in terms of technology, or 10 or 15 years ago. So to have all this technology in your palm would have cost $1 million 10 years ago. So now you have them, but still corporations, they do not force you, but it's super convenient to use their cloud services, right? So these devices are right now capable of storing everything, storing your data, storing your digital property, but they still manage to invite their users, so let's say, or incentivize their users to use their cloud or their computers, so they can read your data, right? Because these corporations make a lot of money selling your data, having a lot of data points from you or from each user. So it's kind of the thing that we have. I mean, again, it's like we have super powerful computers right now on our palms, on our hands. Still, we're feeding all the Web 2.0 companies. So what is about Web 3.0? Web 3.0 is to use now this all computational power, and people, by owning the encryption and the encryption key, we will talk a little bit more about that, then you own your assets, right? And we call this the decentralization in terms of the governance of this data. Now you're in control, which gives you data sovereignty, right? So if you're self-sovereignty, that means you can delete your data, you can share it, you can control access, you can edit it whenever you want without asking anyone's permission, right? So this is, sorry, I extended a little bit more, but this is something that I feel very passionate about, because I've been so lucky to see all of them evolve. Of course, I don't want to blame any of them. I mean, we have different incentives, different technologies, and Web 3.0 would have been possible without Web 2.0 and so on and so forth. So it's just steps toward a better use of the internet.
Absolutely. It's a natural progression, really. And just to adapt a bit more on what Daniel was saying, so Web 1.0 in the early 90s to the 2000s, what we saw were predominantly static websites, right? Websites that users were able to just consume information that was placed by a third party. So example would be Yahoo, right? They had these articles that we were able to consume. Britannica, the encyclopedia, so on and so forth. The progression to 2.0, we saw a very, very big jump to interactive websites, websites that really welcomed interaction and participation from users around the world. So, you know, a notable example is Facebook, right? It still exists to this day. It allowed people to create their own profiles, interact between parties, so on and so forth. Financial applications like PayPal, where we can actually transfer money via the web, and Dropbox as well, where we can actually, you know, sync files across the web automatically. And this is a very, very big jump across from 1.0 to 2.0. And what we're seeing from 2.0 to 3.0 is an even larger jump, right? I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with these applications here, but Brave is a web browser that's hoping to replace Chrome, Safari, and the others, that allows you to browse privately, allows you to actually be compensated instead of being presented ads by advertisers around the world. Status is an application that allows you, it's a decentralized wallet that allows you to accept payments, send payments without fees, have conversations, send goods, digital goods, all that kind of good stuff. And the third is Genobank. We were having a conversation yesterday, Gisele and I, because of our curiosity, we were very interested in getting our DNA looked at and provided data with, and we used 23andMe. We were early adopters of it. And unfortunately, shortly thereafter, we learned of the drawbacks of that, right? And what we'll be talking about very, very shortly is Genobank, enter Genobank, right? What our place is in this new world. Diana, do you want anything to add here?
No, thank you. I mean, just to say exactly, I mean, you can say that these tools look like similar to those and say, well, I don't see too much difference, right? But what I'm trying to tell you is that everything in the back end changes a lot, because these applications runs on no commercial or nor corporate, nothing corporate. I mean, everything is decentralized. It's a bunch of nodes, big, small, medium size, all over the world, just participating into a network. So we are going through the Web 2.0, which is a corporate internet, to a networks of exchange of value in terms of the data. So everything is a transaction in the Web 3.0, and you use these networks that are not controlled by a central authority. So that is literally a change in the status quo. And just because it's a decentralized network where all the security is for granted, right? Because you trusted, or you needed to trust the Web 2.0 companies, because they had the money to build these big data centers. They had the money to buy all the infrastructure. But now everything has been demonetized, right? So you have access to literally like computers all over the world, and you only pay when you use it in terms of transactions. So it's more just, but these are the tools. So our company, Genobank, it could be like the version of 23andMe or Ancestry DNA version in the Web 3.0, where the user controls and owns the information, and you just exchange it via these public networks.
Exactly, absolutely. And without further ado, sorry to keep everyone waiting, I would like to transition to Gisele.
Yes.
To talk a bit more about how Web 3.0 enhances data privacy.
Thank you everyone for coming. So one of the things that got me interested into Genobank was there's this percolation of various companies that are offering a value-added, suggested added privacy, added control. You can even own shares of your DNA in a pool. And when I looked at all of the, let's say, 2 handfuls of companies, and Daniel came to me about writing the paper, I really started to think even more deeply about ownership. How do we define ownership? am I the owner of that 23andMe data that is now in the hands of who knows how many people? We can talk about tracing that later, but this notion of possession is 9/10 of the law. So it's a very well-known phrase that supposedly, potentially it's still arguable, but it started in the 16th century. But if you have possession of something, then you can prove that you own it. DNA is essentially one of these most private, most sensitive, most personal kinds of data. And it's almost like we were convinced to hand the keys to our house, our body being our house, to companies because we know so little about the meaning of DNA and how much information is stored and how much of us, our biology is a map. But I thought to myself afterwards and beginning the research with Daniel, my God, I really don't know who owns my data. I don't understand when it's used, how often it's used, for what purposes it's used. I don't understand. It's almost like I handed the keys to my house and said, it's okay, you know, come and visit anytime you like. You don't have to tell me. Don't worry about it. Just come in and out as you please. And if, you know, something happens in the process, can't sue you, can't talk to you about it, but don't worry about it. Just come into my house anyway. It feels like that's what's happened to me. And so when I did the research with him and our concept began developing slowly, I learned a lot, not only just about blockchain and smart contracts and tokens, but Web 3.0 really is the time now to be able to reclaim our power. I started a long time ago as an elementary school teacher working with bilingual and special education children. So fighting for the underdog is sort of in my blood, and looking at this issue, this problem from a critical evaluation perspective, from a critical analysis perspective, definitely from an ethical and who owns the power perspective, that's where the connection comes in between the power of genomics, your own power, regaining it because we don't have it yet, it's still developing. My interest in GenoBank was really about, they're the only ones that I hear asking the question. They're the only ones that I know of to this depth at least that really engages the other with a capital O, that has conflicting interests in coming into that house of yours, in getting the keys to your house and in keeping the keys to your house being your body again. So the notion of possession, ownership, privacy, who controls what, when, where, all these things have to be answered. It's going to take decades. Privacy laws came into the mix for the paper because we really needed to understand where are the four corners of the law on this. And, you know, as I researched just last night on the congress.gov website to check on what and how many laws are being written right now, or at least being introduced. And to toll, as of last night, we have approximately 12 laws in the mix, having something to do with trying to protect your personal data being various kinds. We can talk about those a little bit later. So with that in mind, I think the heart of what we wanted to talk to you about today is not only to present what is going on and the milestones and stages of the development of Web 1, 2, and 3, but how they intersect with your own questions as to how you will proceed as consumers, how you will be able to evaluate others, and at least the beginning of the learning of what this technology can do for you. It's not going to be the only company. There's going to be a variety, we hope. And one of the things that we can begin to understand is what is it that we need to do in order to regain the notion of, A, I'm allowed to ask the question, I am confused, and I'm not going to believe everything on your website that says it's HIPAA protected, it's GDPR protected, it's GINA protected. I mean, all of those little stamps of approval by X agency or Y agency are not enough anymore. And so Genobank kind of represents a new way to look at how you regain control. Our comparison here for Spotify and Shazam are, if you think of our DNA as songs, really individual, unique pieces of music, we were searching for this appropriate analogy. And so batting back and forth, Genobank is sort of like a Spotify plus Shazam. And let me try to explain. So you have the ability to license your DNA songs to others, but also know when they're being used. And Shazam is the tokenization part of it, which Daniel will explain later. Shazam is magic to me. You know, you hold it up to a piece of music and within less than 5 seconds, it knows exactly what that is. I mean, it's fascinating. How does that happen so quickly? How many different technology stacks, levels, clouds, servers, people, hardware, software, does that go through to give me an answer in less than 5 seconds? So the idea is, and it's conceptually developing, but the idea is that Genobank can be sort of a data investigator for you. And that Shazam is the analogy in that it can help find who is using your data, where it's being used, how many times, for what reason. Because tokens are like little IDs and access nodes to figure out, wait a minute, is it someone over there? Is it someone over here? Is it a sequencer in Germany? Is it somewhere else? So Daniel can explain better, but this is where we are today. We're trying to solve a problem that is not going to be solved today, but rather it is going to be something that we're hoping that you understand, that with us, let us help you answer the questions and come along for the journey. So I hope that at least helps you understand the beginning of my relationship with them and also my interest in Genobank.
Well, thank you very much, Gisele. Actually, this is the part of the technology. I mean, I'm fascinated by what you said, because all of these concepts is very useful for me, because my mind is in terms of cybersecurity and tokens and encryption and elliptic curves. You know, so it's very technical, but you helped me to put it into literally more simple, therefore more elegant concepts that are more and more clear. So Genobank data investigator, as you said, wouldn't be able to exist without the privacy laws, right? Because again, this is like the technology stack, because of course this data investigator is leveraging from the 4 main rights of the 2 biggest or more famous privacy laws, which is the first one is the right to know, right? You have the right to know, you have the right to ask all the companies without any limit. Well, there's some limits in the law. I believe it's one time or 2 times a year, but I mean, I want to say that the potential is you will be able to ask all the companies what information they have from you, right? In terms of the genetic data, the challenge is that most of the transactions, the commercial transactions, let's say 23andMe selling their database to Glaxo, right, to GSK, which was a famous, and it's very publicly available, it's 300 million transactions. So it is said that they sold 5 million data sets, right? So there's a question right away. I mean, if I was or if I am a user of 23andMe, how would I know if I am one of those 5 million, right? And if you go to GSK and you ask only by leveraging your right to know, they will say genuinely, I mean, legit, in a legit way, we don't know because we bought an anonymized database of genetic information. So here's where we can help, because what we do, as you were explaining the Shazam, is that we use 96 exclusive variants of your genome and create a DNA fingerprint protected by the blockchain as this very small but very powerful token that will allow them to just search for those 96 SNPs along 700,000. So you only need, actually you only need 50, but we use 96 just to be more, to have more accuracy, right? But what I'm trying to tell you is that if you compare this to all the database, to the 5 million, and there's a 96 SNP match, it's definitely you. And this is how easy to re-identify this data is. It's almost impossible to de-anonymize DNA data. So every time you hear a company saying, no, but we will just sell an anonymized version of your data, they are somehow not telling the whole story, because it's very difficult. Let's remember, your DNA information has 50% of your mother, 50% of your father, 25% of your children and your grandparents, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's telling the whole story of your family in a very sensitive way. So it is almost impossible, I repeat, to anonymize this data. So what we believe is the core ethos of Genobank is, okay, we know it's difficult, but let's create a record in favor of the people and the users to claim ownership, and then leveraging from the rights of the privacy laws, let's help them to exercise their rights digitally and in terms of the legal framework. So both, you need both the legal framework and the digital realm. So it just went so, but this service fascinates me, and hopefully we will be able to help a lot of people to reclaim their DNA data as it should have been since the beginning.
Absolutely.
And in terms of that, I wanted to stop in terms of the privacy laws in general and law in general. Laws were created, since the beginning of time in order to help protect certain things from others, or misuse of something over others. This is not unique to medicine. This is not unique to genomics. The need for regulation over the private sector is historical, right? Every industry, major industry in the US, across the world, has required regulation to curtail and constrain the selfish needs of, and by selfish I just mean autonomous, meaning of the enterprise, for unlimited powers over whatever they're producing, their employees who they're employing, and so on and so forth. So the fact that only now we're getting privacy laws that are helping protect personal data is just a matter of a historical progression of the also gradual education and understanding of society and the public of, well, until something gets broken, you don't really understand the pieces. And so a lot of hacks happened, a lot of data was lost, a lot of people had issues with identity and their privacy being stolen, and so on and so forth. So you learn post, ipso facto, and that's the nature of almost every industry. It's not an unusual thing. And going back to the essence also of, you may not think your privacy is at risk, but let me read you just one of the lines of our article. There's about 8 billion people on the planet. 26 million have already analyzed their DNA. And one of the quotes I pulled was, so many people have had their DNA sequenced that they have put other people's privacy at risk. So when you're spitting into whatever flask and giving it away, that's one thing. But don't think that that is only you. Just like what Daniel said, you, your relatives, are also now at risk. It's not just you. So, and the more people get sequenced, it's just the risk is multiplying exponentially. So, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we'll be talking more about this from a consumer standpoint in our future webcasts, right? Where we'll be talking about the implications of this, where, you know, in order, my excitement in getting my DNA analyzed is around participating in the genomic revolution. I want to be able to participate and contribute to medical research being conducted by pharmaceutical companies and labs. And what this allows is transparency for that, right? Not only allows me to see exactly where my DNA and how my DNA is helping, but potentially allows me to be compensated, which is an awesome way to go about it, right? And hopefully we'll be covering that in the next couple webinar. But moving on to the next slide, I'd love to talk more about a publication that we had the privilege of being published recently, peer-reviewed, that was written by Daniel and Gisele. So can you please give us an idea of what the article was, please?
Sure. So we combined the intersection of privacy laws, genomic data, and non-fungible tokens to introduce the blockchain science community to the idea that tokens could potentially represent a better version of the control over your DNA mapping. And of course, the CCPA had just come into enacted in January 1st, 2020. That was a huge issue. Everyone was comparing it to the GDPR. And so this paper was really about trying to see where is it that the main legal arguments are in terms of the privacy laws with respect to specifically the California Consumer Protection Act, reflecting it across to the GDPR as well from Europe, but then giving readers a sense of what genomic data has the power to tell and how sensitive and personal it can be. And then the answer calling from smart contracts, specifically non-fungible token smart contracts, as a potential answer, you know, to maybe this is how we can better, not just blockchain, not just smart contracts, not just programmable privacy, not just saying we need to control the constraints and the terms and conditions by which we can technologically oversee and govern data through blockchain and smart contracts, but that specifically non-fungible tokens, because they're unique to the data source itself and can map specific parts of the data source itself, that perhaps we need to look at non-fungible tokens as a possible solution. So this article really lends itself to that. It asks the two questions. One is, we need to address the human challenge. Nobody really, not that I read, and you know, I read over almost 100 sources for this, but there's not really a lot of people talking about how is it that we as a human species now start talking about we do have conflicting interests. A private company wants to keep my data, but I want control over it too. Non-fungible tokens might be an answer in which we can both simultaneously benefit from this without giving up major parts of it. It can be a win-win situation. It does not have to be a non-sum game. And so, so that was one part of it. But the other is the human challenge is how is it that we as stakeholders can work together with conflicting interests, and then of course the actual technical challenge, the technology challenge, and what that means. So that's what this article was about. And I thank Daniel for keeping me persisting at it. He nudged me. I said, no, I have too much to do. And he just kept nudging me. And you know, in reality, the end of it was, I just learned so much. And I thank you for the opportunity to work with you on that. I think it was an incredibly...
Thank you, Gisele, because yeah, I have to say that I find I've been talking about this topic since 2017, I was very impressed. I was very inspired by CryptoKitties. I mean, people who's been into the blockchain movement for the last maybe 4 or 3 years, they had to remember that these non-fungible tokens are famous because of the CryptoKitties. But it called my attention that these CryptoKitties have their own digital genome. You know, it's 2 to the 64 different cats that and that genome has the specificity, I mean the expression, right, or the epigenetics of each cat. It comes from that structure. So it was fascinating for me and say, well, this is solved. I mean, it's already there. We just have to adapt it to the human because it's already there. And no, so I thank you for this opportunity, and thank you again for all of you that are still here in the webinar. I hope this is just at least food for thought, and say, well, let's use blockchain to register private property in the digital realm. I mean, I'm excited again because just on December, no, it was even in January, Nike, the shoe company, just got a patent where now Nike is going to offer through non-fungible tokens a digital certificate for the design, the exclusivity of the design on their shoes. So it's relatively close to what we're doing because we are a unique biological design, right? And the only structure, the only molecule that we have to prove that is DNA, right? So those are the similarities. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing these trends in games with CryptoKitties, in products like Nike, and it is only natural for us to press this on in DNA, right? DNA is the most important asset that we have. It's unique, it's one of one, and it only is natural for it to be turned into a non-fungible token. And this is a good transition. Daniel, you were talking a little bit earlier, and just before we move on to the slide, this is groundbreaking that this research was done and approved. It's fresh off the press less than a week ago, and we'll be sure to forward it to everyone after the webinar so everyone can have a look and read through it. But this is a good transition to privacy laws, right? We're seeing privacy laws around the world, not only in California, but in the European Union as well. Daniel, Gisele, would you like to talk about the CCPA in California and the implications that it has?
Yes, please, Gisele, if you can, please, because you're more expert than me in this privacy laws thing. If you would.
Cheat sheet.
Thank you.
There's so much happening in the privacy laws section. I'm actually working on professional standards, professional software engineering standards that are going to combine a parallel grit to the laws, in my opinion. That's why I'm working on them as well in IEEE. But the specific one in California, you have to meet certain criteria, of course. You have to have a business that makes X million dollars and so on and so forth. But the 6 rights here are extremely important. They are in a new law called COPRA at the federal level, perhaps even going to be extended. But the 6 here are, you can read, I'm not going to read to you. The interesting one here is the right to data portability. This is interesting because the insurance sector, the health sector, the epics of the world that have access to millions and millions of electronic health records have not come together for something that's called interportability. And it is not unusual for you not to know, not where your DNA is, data is, and the reports for it, and who has it and who hasn't used it, but your own just simple health record, to get access to it, to get it from one doctor to the other doctor. So it's interesting that in this personal data law in the CCPA, that they added the right to data portability, meaning try to make it, if possible, through design and by nature, by design, portable, so that I, the consumer, can actually have some control over that. So that was an interesting one. But what's also fascinating here again is biometric information. What is included in the CCPA? And the new laws are moving further even. So private industry is taking a very deep inhale right now as to how it is that they're going to adjust to required new business practices. But biometric information includes variety, not just DNA. It is also including the way you walk, your gait, your iris and a retina scan, things like this. So there's a very deep entry into really understanding that the private sector must wake up to, if they're going to use something of yours from the biology, not just personal identifiers, where you were located and so on and so forth, but it must have permission. And beyond that, not just that it must have, they must gain permission, but they must tell you what they're doing about it. Essentially, that's what this is. They must inform. So this legal perspective is very different. And it's going to create, the next 25 years of a very different modus operandi. So I'm kind of excited about it. I'm in the professional standards. There's lots of standards on ethics that are occurring about student and child data governance. I'm on 2 of them as well. I'm on an AI ethics standard in IEEE. Lots of people around the world are working on the issue around control, ownership, and the ethics of data governance. So it's an exciting time. I'm glad to be here. And again.
No, thank you very much, Gisele. I just wanted to tell you that what I'm fascinating, as you were saying about this, is as a citizen, right? This law, the spirit of this law is to remove the incentive for companies just to make money as a data broker, right? Just to make money out of hoarding data that it's not theirs, and then of course they aggregate it, put some nice tags and everything, which I believe it's somehow of value that is added. But it must remove the incentive to data brokers to exist. Mm-hmm. And this will force companies to be more creative and to invent or create better services on top of our personal information. So this loss is that is the spirit. Let's say, well, don't hoard the data of people if you're not using it to service them. And once you service them, well, delete it or don't have it there, because then you are putting in risk their privacy and so on and so forth. So this is good for everyone, because now having personal data for companies is a liability, and it's going to become very expensive. Now they have to name a data chief officer. People will be held accountable for breaching. Even now, Senator Warren wants the CEO to respond for breaches directly. And I believe, because companies are now, the data is now the new oil, as you said, Suk, in one of our other meetings. I mean, I believe this is a good thing. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Data is fast becoming the world's most precious commodity, right? And this is a representation of our governments really looking on behalf of their constituents, right? I mean, we must regulate the internet giants of the world, right? Who are brokering data and selling data. And this is really going to catalyze blockchain solutions across the board. I mean, blockchain in a lot of ways supports and prevents from these from happening. So this is great. And transitioning to the next thing, we just like to talk broadly about the roadmap and the vision of Genobank in terms of how we approach the market. And Danny, you can feel free to come on in as well. Currently, we see many different paths to market, but 2 that we can line out for you is one, direct to consumer, similar to what 23andMe and Ancestry.com have been doing, selling DNA kits directly to consumer, whether it's via the internet or via CVS pharmacies. And the other one is software as a service, right? There's additional features and functionalities that we can provide beyond just the kit itself. And the other is directly business to business. What if we can provide our solution as plug and play directly to hospitals and clinics, directly to labs and sequencing providers? What if insurance companies can, reimburse you directly for a solution like this? And in addition to that, there's many side ways to go about this as well with the GenoBank wallet, right? Data brokers who are actively retrieving and selling this data can use a solution like ours to offer transparency to consumers and actually compensate consumers for that data that they're leasing out. Danny, would you like to add anything else to this?
Thank you. I mean, I believe this is where we are right now, like exploring that, like being creative about how to monetize, how is the sustainability of the company. It's a question that I receive many times, and is obviously one of the key ones. So the roadmap, as I foresee it with our team, is we have to start with the consumer, but we want to, as quickly as we can, to remove that, because we don't want to spend investors' money on marketing and on money that will have to be spent, like the customer acquisition cost is high. And we don't want to compete with the direct-to-consumer companies out there. We want to be their partners in the Web 3.0 era. So our main business model will be wallet as a service. So it's a term similar to software as a service, or it could be very similar. But we want to create these customized solutions where they can offer their current and new customers the ability to hold the private key that encrypts their DNA data, and maybe they're still being the custodians, right? The data needs to be held in a storage, in a digital storage device. But again, the control is done through these tokens that controls the encryption and controls the access, right? So something in the digital realm is yours if you can read it, if you can mine it, if you can take advantage of it. And if it's encrypted, it's good. It's not good for anyone, right? So what I'm trying to tell you is, if we succeed by working with these companies, now companies, again, they will have the big incentive not to be held accountable for the possible or potential breaches. So if especially the small and mediums one, they will not be able to have a data chief officer and fulfill all the GDPR and CCPA paperwork. It's going to be very expensive. So if they don't want to be the custodians of the data, the solution is to have a non-custodial solution, and we want to partner with them to be that alternative. So our SaaS solution is a data management or an ethical data management for DNA data sets, but it could be also for any health related data. So we are starting with DNA because it's not regulated yet in this. I mean, because it's not necessarily attached to the health system, right? We talked about that earlier. So this is the roadmap, but of course we want to be an open platform, so everybody, even the consumer, will be able to use our solution to register their saliva tubes or tokenize that, and then trace it into the laboratories. Then laboratories will be able to deposit or upload their data coming out of their biosamples using our data management solution, and hopefully in a very affordable and inexpensive way. And hopefully this would be like the ethical alternative even for data brokers, because now for data brokers that decide to use the information, the user becomes their partner, as you were saying. The user is no longer like some entity that I just took the information, I just make sure I had their consent, and then I can do whatever I want with their data. The example that Gisele was putting about like giving just away the keys of my house. No, now it's just to become a partner, and if you make a deal with GSK, now I will receive part of that money if I accept, if I opt in, and that will be the next generation of solutions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we're just pushing 1 hour. We have 2 more slides left, and we'll open up for Q&A. We already have a few questions, so we'll be able to answer those directly. So a few takeaways from today's presentation, and feel free, Gisele or Daniel, to chime in as I go through these. Number one, we want to get across DNA is data, right? We've probably never looked at it before like that way, but it is. And just like data, it can be pulled and it can be sold, leased to third parties. And it's really, really important, first and foremost, to understand that, right? Second, Web 3.0 puts power into consumers' hands. For the first time ever, consumers are able to actually submit data, have ownership of it, make sure it's private and secure in their own ownership. And that also is revolutionary. And third, international privacy laws like CCPA, GDPR are totally disrupting data brokers. Internet giants are going to have to change the way their business model operates in order to, accompany consumers around the world. I think in a lot of ways, consumers are going to have to be looked at, as you just said a second ago, as partners, right? They're not going to be looked at as they were before, and we're going to only see this happening not only in our area of biodata, health, medical research, but across the board. Would any of you, Gisele or Daniel, like to add anything on this?
No, I think we're good. Let's get to the audience so that we can.
Great. And then before we get to the Q&A, I would just like everyone to know, maybe some of you came into this webinar via Republic, maybe some of you have not, but we had the privilege of actually launching a crowdfunding campaign on Republic, which is a crowdfunding platform that allows anyone around the world to invest in companies. And this was actually in collaboration with a reality TV show that Daniel himself was able to pitch to, Meet the Drapers. And to this day, I believe we've raised $344,000, which is phenomenal. We're super grateful for everyone, all our investors around the world. We'll be providing you a link to this, our campaign after this. Feel free to ask questions directly, invest, share, or anything like that. And moving on to the Q&A. So I have a few questions ready. If any of you who are in attendance, please feel free to enter your questions with the Q&A button via Zoom. And it looks like we just got one. Or there you go, Daniel, thank you. So I have a question here. We received this a few times, and I think it's really important. It's salient on top of people's minds, and I think a response would be great to hear on this. Daniel, how enforceable are the patents that Genobank has, right? We see other players in the space, not only that we see as obsolete, non-blockchain, but we also see other people in the space as well. Can you talk on the patents that Genobank has and how enforceable they are in the future?
Yes, of course. So patents, the spirit of patents is to block. Personally, our patents is to start a conversation, right? So we are a cybersecurity company. We are blockchain experts. We are not mainly genetists, right? So a lot of companies out there, especially like for instance, the big 3 players that I have the privilege to be somehow in the same space. I believe we have the same ethos. I mean, we are all playing to empower the users, maybe with different proposals. But again, if in a future we come along and we want to say, so the patents from Genobank are still with the commercial spirit, but it's also to collaborate, right? So we want just to have a good seat inside this conversation, and hopefully the technology we are using, they can even leverage from it if somehow we find a better solution or to be part of a standard or something like that. So because some people say, well, blockchain is not about patents, it's about open software. I would say yes, but the way to monetize blockchain companies was to issue a token and sell it back in 2017 and 2018 out of thin air, and everybody saw that happen. I mean, it went horrible. I mean, like there were like 99% of those companies were literally full of platforms looking for a solution. They were not solving anyone's problem. So we have to go to the model where you have to go and use these regulated crowdfunding campaigns, and you have to somehow protect your investors by have an enforceable piece of technology that you can add to other components. But what I'm trying to tell you in a nutshell is that we don't want to use the patents to block. We want to use patents to create interesting conversations and to make our potential competitors our partners. Because in the end, blockchain is a very big and happy family trying to empower the users and not the corporations. And as long as that main statement or core statement stays in place, we will just be happy to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm. And thank you, Daniel. And what about people who have used sequencing providers to have their DNA analyzed? Can you talk a bit more on that? Right, like I said earlier, I was an early adopter of 23andMe. What about those people who already have had their DNA analyzed?
That's awesome. I mean, we will work very hard to make, again, this Genobank DNA data investigator. We want to be like a private investigator for you. Again, based on the privacy laws, we will, if necessary, spam all the companies out there that are working with DNA. We will try to find who has a copy of your information, as you were saying in the image we were putting there. We want to find instances of your DNA, and then we will let the users decide what do you want to do once we find it, because legally companies have to comply and tell on behalf of our users if they have, and they cannot lie. I mean, if they lie, they would be in legal trouble, right? So if they have a copy using this very specific, very small, but very powerful token based on 96 SNPs, 96 exclusive genomic variations, a comparison. So we want to build this very interesting service, and hopefully in that way we can help users to reclaim their data, and hopefully we can do it for millions, right?
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, thank you. And looks like we have one question. What would stop big companies to implement a similar feature, given that Google is a seed investor of 23andMe?
That's a very good question. Again, our main value proposition from our patents is the use of non-fungibles inside a blockchain. So many companies have talked about similar approaches, but they are just taking a hash, right, of the DNA data. So if you hash any piece of data and then stamp it into the blockchain, or use the blockchain to have a timestamp of that hash, the only thing that you can prove is the data integrity, right? It doesn't tell you more. But we go deep further, because we give an identity to your data inside a blockchain using a unique non-fungible token. That is what the uniqueness of this proposal. So actually, I dare to say that if you're just hashing DNA data into a blockchain, you're just bureaucratizing the access, because you could do it without the blockchain. I mean, you can hash information using MD5 or other solutions out there, and you don't need any blockchain or a digital signature coming from a blockchain to do that. So if companies are just using blockchain to hash information or give access, they are just bureaucratizing. So our approach, when you literally explain why you need a non-fungible token. You cannot get rid of the blockchain solution, and so that's why our patent is unique. And we believe if somebody wants to register DNA data set on behalf of a person using a wallet, then that's our patent, you know, legal terrain or message, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right.
push Suk, if I may.
Yep, absolutely.
Say, Daniel, just keep pushing. So, Mr. or Miss Prasanna, let's say Google wants to use non-fungible tokens, and they're going to write a new Ethereum request for comments, develop one after they read our paper, develop one that's exactly what we're thinking about doing. Then what stops a big boy like Google from doing it? And you know, and it's a new ERC, so it's a different name. It's tweaked maybe just a little bit on one criteria of the comment. What stops them from getting there faster? I think that's where his question was going, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and the answer is, again, the patent is written by the use of smart contracts that we use examples as the ERC 721. We use examples as 1155 just to determine how does it look, but it's not attached exactly to even Ethereum. It's written as a public blockchain. And again, if Google writes something into a public blockchain, they are somehow auto-destroying themselves. So it's also contrarian to what they are doing, and I don't see Google doing something like that. Hopefully they do. Hopefully they do, because now again that means they are giving away the private key to the user, so you can download your key, and by downloading and controlling your private key, then nobody is in control of your data. So they are giving you your self sovereignty, but anything can happen, and more super excited to even talk to the Google guys out there to see how we can still use their fantastic tools for genomic information. They have fantastic tools right now developed, I believe, with the Broad Institute. They have an effort together, fantastic tools. But the problem there is that they can read all the DNA data that it's uploaded, and we somehow, that's not very interesting for me.
Right. I mean, yeah, fingers crossed for all of the software giants to, you know, adopt solutions like this in the future. But it also, I'm sure, leaves a bad taste in consumers' mouths where they realize, you know, what 23andMe did before, and they might not have faith in, you know, a solution that, you know, changes after the fact. But we'll only see, I guess, as time tells. Two more questions. Another question from Nijjar Prasanna. Are you guys planning on ICO for your next round of investment, Daniel?
No, not at all. The ICOs are still unregulated. We never want to put any of our investors, even if it's for $1, into risk. What we are planning is an STO, which is a security token offering. So actually, we already have one with Securitize. We already have partnered with them. Securitas is led by Carlos Domingo. Carlos Domingo is one of the leading persons with the security tokens. These are registered tokens that are pegged or that represent equity of our company. And we have this offering for accredited investors. So if you're accredited investors and you'd like to know more about our token offering, a regulated token offering, we would love to discuss that personally.
Great. And one more question from Mazen. How do you manage to encrypt data, and what are the consequences of having such sensitive information open in the network, even though it's in an encrypted form?
Oh, thank you very much. So when you make sure that your data is encrypted, maybe with a double SHA 256, the effort to decrypt that data, even if it's just one single data set, is even for a quantum computing right now device, it's going to take maybe 17 minutes to break one single bolt. And those 17 minutes in terms of quantum computing, it's approximately, I mean, don't quote me on this, but it could cost like $17 million, something like that. So again, hacking, there's literally or virtually nothing really unhackable on Earth. It's to prevent a hack is just is how hard your shell is to get inside, right? So let's remember, for instance, this San Bernardino case. The FBI said or declared that they needed to invest $2 million to break one single phone, right? But it was on the public interest to do that because it was a very, public case. What I'm trying to tell you is that, again, the incentive to go and break one DNA data from one person is almost zero, right? Because it's easier to go and ask for a judge to have one sample of your DNA and make a judge like literally serve you with a warrant and say, hey, we need a copy of your, instead of just go and hack your vault, right? That's orders of magnitude more easier to do than put a very specific and very or super sophisticated team of people trying to hack a double SHA-256 encryption. It's literally it's nonsense. It doesn't make, even if it's in a public distributed storage network like I.
Right.
Me hiding my keys in a completely unknown, magical, unseen place in my house that nobody knows about, only me, and somebody trying to get those keys inside that house. I feel like the world that we live in is now, which is, here are my keys, versus at least let me try to hide them somewhere where it's going to be very, very difficult to find them. So I'd much rather live in the world where my keys to my body and my biology are hidden than in a world where it's not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Correct. So what I try to tell you is that by decentralizing the information, it's, again, I compare it to an army of ants, right? So we now are an army of ants instead of just one giant elephant. Of course, the elephant has, very thick skin, but with one single good bullet, you can kill it. You can kill the whole animal. That's how big corporations, it's a single point of failure. But now, if you have heavy armored ants, so to attack them, you need to attack 51% of all the ants, right? And it's super difficult. So again, in cybersecurity, we have an old saying, but I love it because it says, well, in cybersecurity, the only thing you have to avoid is to be the lowest hanging fruit, right? And right now, the lowest hanging fruit are corporates that have millions of records that you can steal with one hack, and that you can convert that into millions of dollars, or well, I don't know how much, but you can convert that, or you can sell that in dark web or whatever, But what I'm trying to tell you is that one single bolt for $2 million effort for one single person, it has no incentive as far as I know.
Yep. Great. Well, I think that sums up our webinar for today. We really appreciate for all our attendees coming in and asking questions for us. Hopefully there were takeaways that many of you were able to gather from this webcast. We will be sending out an email after this, not only with the recording of today's webcast, but a few links and resources to the article, our crowdfunding campaign, and others. Just for everyone who's still in attendance, we'll be running another webcast, hopefully in 2 weeks, that will be talking about, topic is still to be determined. If you have any ideas, please feel free to forward them in, but we will be doing another webcast soon. I really thank everyone for attending, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gisele. Thank you, Suk. Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.